We're live. Thank you for being here. I'm just going to remind you that we have a special guest today. You can ask questions by posting them in the comments. A special guest? Yes, a special guest. I am really lucky to have a best-selling author here, a wonderful person, a big thinker, and somebody who I steal ideas from every chance I get. We're here to talk about something at the core of her work, and you've already guessed who it is. So let me just press a couple of buttons to make sure I do this right. 1 second. And I have to go like this, like that, and then back to here, and then like that. Whitney, how are you?
I'm fine, Seth. It's so nice to see you.
I do all this by myself on purpose, but sometimes I have trouble finding all the buttons. So we're talking to Whitney Johnson. You can find her on LinkedIn. If you can't remember how to spell Whitney Johnson, you can just go to bit.ly and type Whitney SCurve, and you'll be surprised at finding a magical page on LinkedIn. So with that said, we are going to have door prizes today. You can go ahead and go to this URL. I'll put it back up a little bit later if you've got them. And we'll also have a book from me and a course. The course is on LinkedIn. The book is at seth.blog/song. But mostly we are here to answer your questions. Go ahead and post them in the chat. Hi, Whitney.
Hello. I mean, I just keep on thinking door prizes. I want door prizes.
You will get door prizes. I sometimes it's not a fair drawing. So you'll send me your address and you can have a door prize too. I'm thrilled to see people already showing up in the chat. Let's talk, if we can, just to dive in about this thing that I'm obsessed with, which is the SCurve. I don't think enough people know what we're talking about. So here's the curve on the screen. And why don't you narrate your take on it, and then I'll tell you my favorite part.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wait, I better change the way the screen looks so that people can see it, because
so
it's getting cut off. Okay, you'll just do that.
There you go. All right, so the SCurve, some of you are familiar with it because it was popularized by Everett Rogers back in the 1960s. It was called the adoption curve. Malcolm Gladwell helped further popularize it by that tipping point that he talked about. But I had this big aha about 10 years ago. I was working with Clay Christensen. We were investing. And I thought, this SCurve isn't just about the adoption of ideas. The SCurve can help us understand how we learn and how we grow. It can help us understand what growth looks and feels like. It can answer questions why is it so hard to start something new? Why, once I do start, is it easy? And why can I be really good at something and feel like I can no longer keep doing it? So there are 3 major parts to the curve. There's the launch point, there's the sweet spot, there's mastery. And very briefly, what happens at the launch point is the growth is happening, but it's not yet obvious. And so it feels slow. It feels like a slog. You can feel impatient. You can feel like an imposter, which Seth likes to talk about. And so you feel like, I don't know if I want to keep doing this. But then if you persist, you move into the sweet spot and the growth starts to feel fast, and it is fast, and you feel exhilarated. So emotionally, it's very easy to keep going. But then in mastery, something very interesting happens. You now know what you're doing. You're very good at it, but growth is in fact slow. So you have this dilemma. The dilemma is, I like being on top of the curve, master of all that I survey, but at the same time, I know that I need to keep growing. And so do I stay here and allow the plateau to become a precipice, or do I make the decision to disrupt myself so that I can continue to grow? So what the SCurve does is it helps you understand what growth looks like, and more importantly, what it feels like, so that you can navigate the process of change for you as an individual, but also for your team and your organization.
Bingo. Okay, here's my part. That blue arrow. That blue arrow for me is the whole deal, because now what do I have to do? I have to go like this. There's so many buttons. Oh, I know why. I have to go like this. Look at this. Isn't this fun?
Being on an SCurve, Seth.
The thing is that what gets minimized when we use the word disrupt is the thrill, the sense of meaning and significance that comes from flow, from doing work you didn't think you could do, figuring it out, finding out, how to make all the buttons work so that the slides show up, as opposed to just phoning it in. And it's at that blue arrow that we are most alive. And
Yes,
that's what makes it the best job anybody ever had.
absolutely. Absolutely.
And so I just wanted to highlight for people how much I got out of being reminded of this. And so Ian's got a question to get us started here.
And I'm gonna cough for just a minute. So you talk to
Go ahead. Ian's question: can new technology push you back down the curve? And my short answer is yes. And that is why the technology adoption lifecycle from Rogers looks exactly the way it does, because we don't like to feel incompetent, but everything, whenever we learn it, is a moment of feeling incompetent before we start to feel good again. Do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, and I think not only can it push you down the curve, and like you said, that's a good thing, but also it can also be a gift. So, for example, if you are in a role, you are at a company that you very much enjoy, and you think, I actually don't want to leave, I want to stay here. That new technology can take you from this place of mastery where I've learned it all. You're like, oh, let's experiment with this, and so it can really be a gift of pushing you back into the sweet spot, back in that place of flow that Seth just talked about. Which, what's interesting about flow too, I think, Seth, is that, when people ask you how you're doing, they'll tell you, oh, I'm really struggling, I'm at the launch point of the curve. Or they'll say to you, oh, yep, I got to do something new, I'm in mastery. But they rarely talk about the sweet spot because they feel like they're bragging. And yet that is, like you just said, the place where you feel most alive. That is the song of significance. Oh, I can't say that word.
Me either.
Wow. Why did you name the book that? That is a song of significance that we feel.
Yeah. And so, true story, many, many, many books ago, I was doing a seminar in my old office. I had 20 people there for the day. And my agent, who had an office down the hall, came in with a fax she had gotten from the New York Times. And it showed that for the third time, one of my books was a New York Times bestseller. And I started to cry. And the reason I started to cry is because it meant nothing. It meant nothing. It used to be this thing I had to achieve. And I realized in that moment how empty chasing that thing again was, because I wasn't going to learn anything from making a bestseller again. I was going to learn something from first making the book and then interacting with other people about the ideas, but some third party that could easily be gamed. And, like, I know how to do that. I don't want to do that. And I realized that what the world thought was important wasn't what I thought was important. And, all these people who are on this call have already succeeded. That's not the question. The question is, will you choose to matter? And you don't get to matter by doing what you did yesterday over and over again.
That's so beautiful. And it's interesting. I think you make a really great point, because before you were a New York Times bestseller for the first time, that was an SCurve that mattered for you, in part because then people would listen to what you have to say. So they're sort of getting those bona fides. But I do think what's interesting that you just illustrated is when you get to the top of that curve, there's a piece of you that says, I'll stay with the status quo. But there's also this piece of you, and I think this goes back to the life that matters, that says to yourself, I've accomplished what I came to do here. I feel, so people sometimes ask me, how do I know when it's time to jump to a new curve? And I'll say, well, you might be bored. There might be a number of things. But the clincher is always, I feel that there is more for me to do on this planet, and I can't do it if I stay where I am.
Yeah. That's so beautifully said. All right, so I want to talk about an external thing and then an internal thing. The external thing, I want to talk about the bib defenders.
What are those?
I don't know if you saw
No.
this article in the Times a couple of days ago, but apparently at elite track meets, they still make the runners wear these paper bibs with 4 safety pins on their very expensive high-tech jerseys, 4 safety pins holding the bibs. They slow the racer down. They're annoying. The things rip. There's nobody should be in favor of the bibs. And the article, and there's a technological solution, which is you could just make a necklace that has an RFID chip in it and it would work so much better.
Mm-hmm.
But there were all these bib defenders quoted in the article, and they each had a stupid reason why we can't live without the bibs.
Mm.
And I just thought it was so worthwhile to highlight the fact that there are bib defenders in your life. And they may have put something in your head that makes you a bib defender when better is possible.
Okay. Have you written about this on your daily blog? You have already.
I've not written about the bib defenders yet.
We know it's
going in the queue though.
Coming up. Yeah. I think that is so powerful. And you know what I think is important is when someone starts defending the bib, that's the best line ever, is that there's a piece of us that we feel attacked, like, wait, you don't like my bib. But in our moments of transcendence, which sometimes we do better than others, can we step back and ask ourselves, why are they defending the bib? Because as I think about, jumping to new SCurves or disrupting yourself, every time you or I want to do that, by definition, the other people in our lives, we are asking them to disrupt themselves too. We are asking them to jump to an SCurve as well, new SCurve as well. And so what they're saying is, I'm a little bit afraid. I don't know what this is going to look like. I don't know what this will do to our relationship. And so can we, when we find people defending the bib, ask that question of, why are they doing this? What's really going on? And when we're at our best self, we're able to ask that question.
Yes. That's beautifully said. And that was the internal thing, right? Is that the external thing is we're surrounded by bib defenders. The internal thing is that there's something holding us back. So that's a great segue into Cosmina's question. What could be the effects of the intersection in time of different SCurves in our lives, depending on the various learning journeys we are on? That's a great question.
Oh, that is a good question, Cosmina. So what I would say is I think about the SCurve is very much a fractal because your life is an SCurve, but your day is also an SCurve. And you can have a portfolio of SCurves. And so the way I would think about this is that you at any given time have several SCurves that you're on. We know from project management research, we know from neuroscience, you probably can only do 3 or 4 pretty well. And so what you want to think about is, all right, so where am I on the SCurve at work? Where am I on the SCurve within my family life? Where am I in the SCurve in terms of the geography that I live in, my hobbies, etc.? And so the way I think about balancing that portfolio of SCurves is to use as a starting point the standard bell curve distribution and say, I probably want most of my SCurves in the sweet spot. By the way, you can use this with your team, but for your life, 2 or 3 in the sweet spot. I probably want 1 where I'm at the launch point because that's going to invigorate me and keep me alive and fresh. And I also do want 1 in mastery where it's an anchor for me. It's stabilizing me and I can sort of pull the rest of my life up because I'm feeling exceedingly competent in this area. So that's how I would think about it. And so, for example, if you have just moved to a new city, you've just taken on a new job, and you've just had a baby, probably you're going to need a little bit of support because you're all trying to navigate this launch point. But if in fact you are, you've been at the same job for 10 years, you haven't moved to a new city, your children have all grown, you probably want to navigate a few more launch points because that's what's going to allow you to continue to stay alive.
And that's just really profound. And what's also worth remembering is the story we tell ourselves is the story we tell ourselves. So there are people who will say they're living with insufficiency because there's a book report due in 7 days and they're going on vacation in 3 months. This is no time to start doing something new. Whereas there are other people who run a small country and still have time to learn how to play the banjo, right? Because it's how we decide to interpret abundance versus scarcity. And what the industrial system has indoctrinated us to do is not seek the sweet spot because it undermines the efficiency of the factory. What they want are people who just listen to their boss. They want turnover to disappear. They want obedience. And so we got indoctrinated in that in school, that it is better in school to get straight B pluses than to get an A in the thing that lights you up and a couple D's. that it is better in school to make the football team than to be really good at 5 sports that, So when I went to college, I took as many courses as the bursar would let me, because it was the same price.
Yeah.
And I took as many courses as I could pass fail, or if they wouldn't let me, I just took a C. I didn't care, because I got an enormous amount of pleasure from learning a little about a lot. And then every once in a while would learn a lot about a little. But I was surrounded by people who just said, how do I get an A? Right?
It's interesting that you say that. You're right. I would say the Industrial Revolution wants to hire automatons who are all in mastery and want to be in mastery forever and a day. I do think what's interesting, Seth, that you just said that when you were in college, that you wanted to be at the launch point. You wanted to have the experience of being at the launch point. I do find when I talk to college students that they really struggle with this. Why? Because the launch point is messy, 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 messy. It opens loops. It creates uncertainty. And so we want to be there. But like you said, industry doesn't want you to be there because it means you don't know what you're doing yet. And yet, if we can be in that place, that allows us to move into flow. I will say I'm actually really impressed that you were comfortable doing that, because that's something that's very difficult, I think, for most of us. And I'll add this. One of the reasons that most of us are, the older we get, actually, I would say we can insulate ourselves from the launch point. And so we actually have to really make a concerted effort to do new things. Otherwise, we never would. And so we start to die inside when we do that.
Yes. All right. Let me take a second to look for some good questions here, because they were just flying by. Here's one from someone named User. Are anchors really an illusion? And do they really hold you back? When we were talking about the anchors that we're looking at, you want to riff on that for a minute?
I do. So I would say yes and no. So as I think about the SCurve, when you get into mastery, there's this place where the behavior that you are striving to achieve becomes you. And I do think that place is very, very important, because it's no longer out there. It's part of you. And when you drop anchor, you're celebrating. And so you're honoring what you've accomplished, who you are, and you're feeling good about yourself, which you're celebrating, you're marking the moment, you're activating your parasympathetic nervous system, all of which makes you feel good, so that you feel greater sense of confidence and are more willing to navigate a new launch point. So it is not an illusion, but it is illusory. So that I would say, but it does give you the confidence to start something new.
Okay, so a couple of things I want to talk about as we start to wrap this up. We're going to have time for one more question. Go ahead. Sign up for door prizes if you're in the United States. I can't ship them overseas. The door prizes include these beautiful handmade letterpress posters that I made with Dan at the Arm in Brooklyn, and some really cool recycled style t-shirts, etc. And my book comes out on Tuesday. What is it about? It's about the best job you ever had. And my argument is that in the post-industrial world that we are entering fast, if you are surrounded by people who are also having the best job they ever had, everything is going to get better. Profits, productivity, workplace, everything. And yet we are holding back, commanding people to go back to the office, calling that going back to work, doing surveillance, taking attendance via Zoom calls, brutally firing disabled people just because we're a billionaire and we can. This long list of the final throes of industrial capitalism. And what I am hoping, and I have a LinkedIn course that just launched yesterday. It's free right now if you want to take it. That's all about how do we talk to each other about this. And I think what you've done so beautifully, Whitney, is for people who need a chart, here's a chart. For people who need a story, here's a story. And for people who need a narrative, here's the proof and the narrative. And by weaving those three things together, you're going to the entire organization and the people in the organization say, we can coach you through this and we can teach you how to talk about it. And I think that's really important. All right, this does not count as one of the final questions. It's this. It's pretty easy to remember. Seth.blog/door prizes. Okay, we're going to make that go away. And we're going to go to comments. I thought I saw one go by. Hold on. Everyone's saying very nice things, which I appreciate. Okay, here's a great one from Dhruv. take us out with this one. Whitney, go ahead. Can you be a generalist and a specialist at the same time?
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about, so here's what I would say. Having a specialty in something is going to open the door for you. It's going to, it becomes table stakes. But what I would say is that once you're able to get in that door or on that S-curve, if you will, then your ability to be a generalist, to look across a lot of different industries, a lot of different sectors, is what is going to propel you up the S-curve. I would say, Seth, you're probably familiar with David Epstein's work range. And we, having a conversation with him, we said, oh, your work is in praise of the launch point. There's a lot of value to knowing lots of different things and being a fish out of water. But I would say, so yes, you can be a generalist that will hold you in good stead. But almost always there's something that you need to know how to do pretty well that becomes the table stakes to open the door, so that then your generalist prowess you can bring that to bear on whatever it is you're working on.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I have to have the last word because I have the mouse. My last word is, if you're going to be a generalist, you don't get to be mediocre at a lot of things. What you have to do is be really, really good at being a generalist, which means being aware of where all the buttons are and being able to triage things and put them where they need to go. Somebody who's mediocre at woodworking and plumbing and painting is not a handy person. They're just mediocre. And that's not what a generalist needs to do.
So you need to be a specialist at being a generalist.
Exactly.
There you go.
Anyway, thanks everybody for tuning in. Go make a ruckus. Check out Whitney's stuff on LinkedIn. It's pretty special and we need you. So thanks. And thank you, Whitney.
Yeah, thank you.